Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 19th of December. I'm Erin Viner. This is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Residents of the south were today startled by the firing of a missile from the Gaza Strip. The code red siren rang out shortly before noon local time throughout the Eshkol Regional Council. Troops located the rocket in an open area and no damage or injuries were reported. The incident marks the third time since the end of the 50-day summer war with Hamas that Palestinians fired missiles from Gaza that hit Israeli territory. Meanwhile, the Ynet news service is reporting that Hamas has been commandeering building supplies being brought into Gaza for the reconstruction of homes damaged during Operation Protective Edge and is instead using them to rebuild its underground network of terror tunnels. Sources in Gaza are cited as saying that Hamas has already started to prepare for its next conflict with Israel and is revising war strategies to include the launching of multiple attacks by terror cells and a switch from missiles from shorter range to shorter range mortars in efforts to counter the effectiveness of Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. The United States will not support the current draft resolution that the Palestinians have submitted to the United Nations Security Council. This according to U.S. State Department spokeswoman Jen Psaki, although she didn't rule out statehood-related proposals altogether. The current draft sets out a 12-month deadline for wrapping up negotiations on a final settlement and Israeli withdrawal to the pre-1967 lines by 2017 and the creation of a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as a shared capital. France, Britain, and Germany are working to advance a separate text on a strategy to revive the peace process.
We have seen the draft. It is not something we would support, and we think others feel the same and are calling for further consultations. The Palestinians understand that. You may have also seen President Abbas speak to this earlier today and have said they support continued consultations and are not pushing for a vote on this now.
Do you think this is something that can form the basis of negotiations, as President Abbas indicated, or is this something so far from what might be acceptable that entire alternatives must be come up with?
Well, I think there are a range of issues that we're all aware, people from all sides and parties will be discussed as a part of any draft resolution. But in terms of the specifics of this in its current form, we couldn't support it. We're not currently engaging on the submitted text. Our focus right now is more on consultations with key stakeholders, and we look forward to continuing our conversations to find a way forward. So as we have been, as the Secretary, I should say, has been over the course of the last several weeks, even this morning he continued to have discussions with parties in the region and stakeholders about how to come to a place that would be the most productive path forward.
Psaki also encouraged the European Union to reinstate Hamas on its list of designated terror groups after a European court ruled that the 2001 designation was based on so-called faulty evidence.
We are studying the court's opinion carefully. According to a statement by the European Union, this decision was based on procedural grounds. We understand that the EU sanctions on Hamas remain in effect pending the EU's decision on whether to appeal. The U.S. position on Hamas has not changed. Hamas is a designated foreign terrorist organization. Hamas continues to engage in terrorist activity and has demonstrated its intentions during the summer's conflict with Israel. It fired thousands of rockets into Israeli civilian areas and attempted to infiltrate Israel through tunnels that extended into Israel. We will continue to work closely with the European Union on Hamas-related issues. We believe that the EU should maintain its terrorism sanctions on Hamas.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is welcoming the French-backed initiative for an international peace conference to relaunch negotiations with Israel, but says that the talks should not last more than a year. Speaking to the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah, Abbas said that following the submission of the draft on Palestinian statehood to the UN Security Council, consultations with world superpowers is ongoing. The Palestinians submitted the statehood resolution to broaden the issue worldwide, according to Palestinian political science expert George Giacoman from Birzeit University, who also warned that the breakdown in peace talks may lead to the breaking out of war.
The attempt, in other words, is to try to internationalize the Palestinian-Israeli conflict insofar as possible. This is the one overall aim of the Palestinian Authority. The other aspect has to do with internal Palestinian public opinion, which puts a lot of pressure, is putting a lot of pressure on the Palestinian Authority. to try to bring about some change in the status quo that Palestinians cannot bear for various reasons, because primarily occupation continues. We are at a very difficult and critical moment, but the political vacuum that exists now and has existed at least since January 2014, after the failure of the efforts of Secretary Kerry, ultimately will lead to some conflagration, some form of conflict on the ground. Everybody understands that.
Former Foreign Ministry legal advisor Alan Baker discussed the legal status of the Palestinians' UNSC resolution with IBA's R.A. O'Sullivan, as well as his assessment of who's coming out the winner in the statehood bid.
Legally, it's very interesting because according to the Oslo Accords, which are still valid, they're still in force, the Palestinians are committed not to do anything to change the status of the territories pending the outcome of permanent status negotiations. Now, one can claim that by going to the Security Council in order to bypass the negotiating process, they're basically trying to alter the status of the territories and to represent themselves as a state. As such, they're committing a basic violation of the Oslo Accords, which in turn, legally speaking and theoretically, would enable Israel to view the Accords as void and to carry out its own unilateral actions. Now, this, of course, is all theoretical, because Israel and the Palestinians haven't yet determined that the Oslo Accords are no longer valid. In fact, they've both maintained continued validity of the Accords.
So what's the purpose of a threat like this?
Well, it's a threat that if Israel decides on the basis of some type of new Security Council resolution, which probably won't happen, but if it were to happen, and if it were indeed to change the game rules, it would be a game changer. It would undermine 242. It would undermine the fact that the Europeans and the UN are all basically signatories to the Oslo Accords as witnesses and as guarantors. The UN endorsed the Oslo Accords. So adopting a new resolution which basically removes the accepted resolutions 242 and 338 for calling for negotiations, etc., by removing that, you're basically removing the basis of the Oslo Accords. And so there's something in what he says, theoretically again, whether ultimately there'll be a change is highly doubtful, and whether ultimately the government of Israel will decide to, or the new government of Israel or whatever, to declare the Oslo Accords no longer valid and therefore carry out its own unilateral actions, including removing the Palestinian Authority. Again, it's academic, it's theoretical. I doubt very much whether it could happen, and I doubt very much whether it's in the interest of Israel or the Palestinians to allow this to happen, because it would create a huge vacuum. If the Oslo Accords don't exist, then the Palestinian Authority loses its basic legal right to exist. The president of the Palestinian Authority, the Rais, no longer has his job, and so there's a vacuum. And of course, we know who wants to come into this vacuum, that organization that's no longer considered by the Europeans as a terrorist organization, Hamas.
You say it's highly doubtful that the UN Security Council will accept this?
Well, as far as we understand, the Americans are going to veto the Palestinian draft. Whether there'll be another draft submitted by the French or by the Jordanians, which the Americans won't veto, and if this draft gets the required majority, then the question will be whether it would be a game changer or not. Okay. I think the aim of the French is to produce language that wouldn't change the basic requirements of negotiation, but would create some type of framework or target date for completing negotiations. And this wouldn't necessarily undermine or change the existing Security Council resolution.
If this passes through the UN, who are the winners and who are the losers?
I think both sides will probably lose, because Israel will treat this as a violation of the process, and the Palestinians will treat this as a victory and an approval of their new status. And neither of these things will contribute to ultimate need to get down to negotiate, because even if there is a declaration of a Palestinian state, and even if the whole world were to accept this, including Israel possibly, there'd still be a need to negotiate borders. You know, it takes two to tango. It takes two sides of the border to negotiate the border. There are issues such as water, security, refugees, settlements. All these are issues that can't be dictated by the United Nations or by the Irish Parliament or by the French Parliament or the Spanish Parliament. You know, it's all wishful thinking on their part.
Political commentator Gil Troy told IBA's R.A. O'Sullivan that he was shocked by the EU's removal of Hamas as a terror group and that he places part of the blame for the decision on Israel's prime minister.
I'm rarely surprised. But when I see in this day and age, and I see in a week when over 100 children are slaughtered in Pakistan, when downtown Sydney is frozen by a terrorist, that the European Union can, on a technicality, in its judicial arm, somehow decide that Hamas is not a terrorist organization, I'm speechless. I'm just dumbfounded. How could it be? And what we really see is a kind of blindness. Now, the Europeans are saying, no, 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 this is just a technicality. The case wasn't made properly for why Hamas is a terrorist organization, and they relied on the internet and journalistic sources rather than other sources. I mean, how many buses do we have to see exploded? How many families do we have to see destroyed? How many times do we have to see them celebrating in the streets that this is their tactic, and they're proud of that tactic, for us to need more evidence? It's just shocking. And what's scary about it is that it's one thing to see that kind of moral blindness in Europe, but we're also starting to see it in the United States of America. And we're seeing two elements. One is diplomatically, Israel is losing its traction. And two, morally, popularly, in the United States among elites, not yet among the masses, in Europe, people are fed up with Israel. Bibi Netanyahu has this image in his own mind as the master speaker, the one who speaks English so beautifully and can somehow sway the American masses and the European masses. It ain't working. And I think one of the things we're seeing in this diplomatic tsunami is a backlash against Bibi's tactics, Bibi's rhetoric, Bibi's leadership. And I don't think that it's helpful for Israelis to vote based on how popular an Israeli politician is in Europe or not. But I do think that this is an example of Bibi fatigue, and this is an example of Bibi's failure.
How can you say that all of Israel's woes in the world are because of Bibi?
I would never say that all of Israel's woes are because of Bibi, but I would say that right now there's a kind of pile-on that's going on. What happens is, especially in world opinion, it's not thought through. And things happen, and there are kind of dynamics. And I think one of the dynamics that we're seeing is that a kind of broad-based repudiation of Bibi's leadership outside and Bibi's Israel is playing out in a very ugly way. And I admit that it's partially a distortion. You know, right now in the United States, there are all these protests against police shooting black kids. Imagine if Mitt Romney were president right now. Right? And they say if there had been a shift of 360,000 votes, we might have had a Romney. It would have been Mitt Romney's America. Now, those riots and protests playing out in Mitt Romney's America, as opposed to Barack Obama's America, would have had everybody going on about, you see, it's because of Mitt Romney. So you have to be careful not to put too much on a leader. And democracies are complex. Democracies are multidimensional. When we look internally within Israel, we see that dimensionality. We see that complexity. Unfortunately, people from the outside looking in are only seeing Bibi's Israel. They're only seeing the right wing. They're only seeing the settlements, the occupation. It's become an obsession. It's become such an obsession that this week we saw 20 leading academics from the Zionist left propose that the United States government and Europe slap personal sanctions on Naftali Bennett, Moshe Feiglin, and two other leaders, seizing their bank accounts and limiting their movement in those countries. And you go, this is the big issue in the world today? You have ISIS slaughtering tens of thousands. You have hostage taking. You have Taliban. You have the Chinese, who have 10 million political prisoners in Tibet and elsewhere. And this is the big issue. What's going on? There's a kind of obsession. There's a kind of groupthink that's going on. And we have to figure out how to get out of the groupthink. I don't like to predict, but I do believe that if Yesh Atid were elected, if Labour were elected, if you had a Herzog face, if you had a Lapid face on Israel, all of a sudden you'd see, in the same way that Americans kind of decided that Rouhani is a more moderate Iranian, which is ridiculous, you would see a genuine sense of, this is the Israel I know and love. And we kind of need that.
Immigration to Israel from North America has registered a 7% increase over last year. 3,762 new citizens from the United States and Canada came to live in the country during 2014, including around 350 young Jews who enlisted in the IDF as lone soldiers, arriving in Israel on their own and without their immediate families. There's also been a 6% increase in immigration from the United Kingdom since 2013, with 525 Olim, mostly from the cities of London and Manchester. A U.S. prosecutor will seek the death penalty against white supremacist Frazier Glenn Miller, who has just been found competent to face trial on charges of killing 3 people at 2 Jewish sites in suburban Kansas City this past April. Johnson County District Attorney Steve Howe announced his intention to seek the death penalty at a hearing for the 74-year-old Missouri resident who has said that he felt it was his patriotic duty to kill Jews. During yesterday's hearing, Miller disrupted the proceedings by shouting that he was motivated to attack the centers because Jews are committing genocide against white people. Miller was brought into the courtroom in a wheelchair because he suffers emphysema. Judge Thomas Kelly Ryan has scheduled a 3-day preliminary hearing to be convened this coming March. The months-long siege of the Yazidi minority by the Islamic State has ended after Kurdish Peshmerga forces stormed the Sinjar mountain in Iraq. Hundreds were freed, although they've not yet been evacuated from the area, where they were held captive by the extremist Sunni jihadis since August. Other Kurdish-controlled parts of northern Iraq were also liberated in the assault, which was backed by heavy U.S.-led airstrikes during the siege. ISIS fighters declared the ancient religious group to be devil worshippers and executed an unknown number. The United Nations estimates that at least 50,000 Yazidis fled Sinjar. Girls and women captured by ISIS were raped, forcibly converted to Islam, or sold in open slave markets. Babies born to Yazidi women in Islamic State prisons were taken from their mothers to an unknown fate, and there have been many reports of frequent suicides among the female population since August. Turning to Boston, where marathon bombing suspect Dzhokhar Tsarnaev has appeared in court for the first time since his arraignment in July 2013. U.S. District Court Justice George O'Toole, Jr. made no rulings during the final pretrial conference yesterday, including appeals from defense counsel to change the venue of the trial away from Boston. One of Tsarnaev's attorneys also told the judge that the defense plans to file a motion to delay the trial, which is now scheduled to begin on January 5th with jury selection. 3 people were killed and more than 260 others injured in the double bombing near the finish line of the April 2013 marathon. Tsarnaev has pled not guilty to 30 federal charges and faces the possibility of the death penalty if he's convicted for carrying out the attacks and killing a policeman with his older brother, Tamerlan, who was killed in attempts to apprehend them. Now here at home, tonight marks the 4th night of the Hanukkah holiday, which is a magical time of year with glowing candles, sparkling lights, and fun events, as we see in this report from IBA's Nurit Finger.
Offering the chill of ice with the elegance of ballet, the Nutcracker on Ice performed by the Moscow-based Imperial Ice Stars thrill and enchant audiences of all ages. The stars of the company include former professional Olympic competitors, refining their skills through years of tireless training. Following a fairy tale composed by Tchaikovsky to a classic Russian story, this art form of ice dance manages to transport ballet onto theatrical setting.
When the actors gliding on the stage, it looks like a fairy tale. It's amazing and it's absolutely unbelievable. It's unusual when these curtains open, you come in our fairy tales.
Nutcracker on Ice will play throughout the country until January 3rd, 2015. Music lovers are also welcome to take part in the Tzlilim Bamidbar annual festival. Including a wide range of styles, the festival offers contemporary classical music played by the Beersheba Symphonette, jazz, rock, and Hasidic songs performed by the Middle Eastern Jewish funk, opera music, and musical theater. The 17th annual Music Sounds in the Desert will run until Sunday at Kibbutz Sde Boker in the Negev region. Hanukkah shows are well underway, so enjoy the holiday spirit and make the most of what it has to offer. Chag Sameach.
So now it's time to light the Hanukkah candles, and joining me here in the studio is reporter Alexandra Jen to do the honors. Go ahead, Alex.
All right. This is my first time lighting the candles for a menorah.
And we know that you're not fluent in Hebrew, but you're willing to give it your best shot.
I'm going to give it a try. Okay.
There you go.
Thank you. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav vetzivanu ladlik ner shel Hanukkah.
Amen.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam she'asa nisim la'avotenu bayamim hachem b'zman hazeh.
Amen. And put it back in here. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Our crew wants to sing. Thanks, guys. And thank you, Alex. All right, I think that's it. All right, now turning to local finance. And the shekel today increased in strength against all major foreign currencies. And due to the closure of the stock market on Fridays, here's a look at the closing numbers for the week. The IBA weather team is telling us to expect a little overnight rain mainly in the north with partly cloudy conditions tomorrow and the chance of isolated rain showers afternoon. Here's the forecast at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. We hope to see you again tomorrow, and I'll be back to bring you the latest breaking news from Israel. I'm Erin Viner, wishing you a wonderful evening, happy Hanukkah, and Shabbat Shalom from Jerusalem.